Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're now at page number 25 of Professor Ajam's edited version of his doctoral thesis, Re the Cape Muslim Schools, Origin of the Cape Muslim Schools. That's Professor Ajam. And the title of this part here is now part 11. The growing Muslim schools at the Cape. Okay, right. The growing Muslim community meant more children. The school and traditional home madrasa or school became overcrowded. The home schools became overcrowded. This put pressure on the poor Cape Muslims to provide learning centers for their children if they wished to maintain their faith in a largely Christian ruled British colony. The popularity of the home madrasa was that it offered an ideological resistance to the English Christian culture. Quote, Muslim education encouraged children, regardless of race or religion, thereby drawing hundreds of otherwise excluded children into the Islamic circles. Secondly, the Imam conducted the lessons in a language, Afrikaans, which appealed to the largest linguistic pool at the Cape. And finally, the Islamic school offered alternative education for many people hostile to or suspicion of the ruling Christian order. This is a quote from Shell, B.R.C. Shell, from Right to Rebellion, Islamic Conversion at the Cape, 1805 to 1918. Yale University Seminar, 1881, unpublished paper. You see that Professor Ajam has really dug deep into the real Cape Muslim history. Right, Muslims and non-Muslims also used the traditional home madrasas for custodial care for the young. So the Muslims offered madrasa, also offered uh, the people home care for their children, like a preschool or a aftercare. They were happy to have their children in socialized care where approved conduct was taught. Often parents would only afford to send their children to one of these madrasas or schools or home-based caring. They preferred to pay the Islamse school, which had a good moral influence over their children. So Christian families also sent their children for aftercare and for preschool, etc., or for pre-care to Muslim families to look after them because they know the Muslims were clean and they were highly moral people. Richer, pious Muslims went on pilgrimage to Mecca and often took their sons with them to be taught in Islamic curriculum by renowned Arab tutors. Improved travel facilities extended the educational horizons of the Cape Muslims. Quote, the opening of steam communication with Zanzibar, which rendered the pilgrimage to Mecca more practical, and visits of teachers from Arabia and other Mohammedan centers. Lightfoot quoted from Lightfoot's work. Other contacts were also made with Mauritius and Aden, located on the steamship route. This added to the teaching skills available to the Cape Muslims, madrasas. Many esteemed Muslim teachers who worked in the Cape community schools studied in Mecca. Cape Town newspaper, 1903. So you can see the Muslim community of the Cape, Bo-Kaap, etc., were very well organized. They were not, okay, I can't express me more. They were not descendants of slaves. They were really free people that had their own religion, and they could develop that religion and to a point where others, colonialists, would become Muslims. Alhamdulillah. So this added to the teaching skills available to the Cape Muslims. Many esteemed Muslim teachers who worked in the Cape community schools studied in Mecca, Cape Town newspaper, 1903. Of note among the young men who left for Mecca to learn was Haji Muhammad Salih Hendricks from the Azavia in the present Home Estate, Woodstock, Cape Town. He studied for 15 years in Mecca. He was the son of a well-known and highly respected Swellendam Imam, Haji Hendricks. Muhammad Salih was born in 1871. He attended the Swellendam College for 6 years. At the age of 17, he left for Mecca to study the religion of Islam. He attained, quote, his professorship under the tutorship of Alim Zayd Abu Bakr Sata, Alim Sheikh Suleiman Sata, Alim Sheikh Umar Bajumat, and Mufti of Islam Sheikh Muhammad Said Bab Saleh. This is the Cape Argus, 4th of May, 1903. He was of the fortunate ones who had a backing of an influential family. The majority poor and working class Muslim children did not enjoy that privilege. They had to receive schooling at Cape Mission schools. They were often classed among the coloreds, quote, inverted commas. Although they were free and equal before the law, they occupied a subordinate social status and an inferior economic position, equivalent to what their enslaved and dispossessed ancestors had long suffered. Some of them who were slaves had suffered. Colored people made up the bulk of the colony labor class, and as such were subject to the disadvantageous legal controls and depressed material conditions. Maltino F. Wentz, Colored Education Aspect of the Evolution of a Segment of South African Segregated Schooling System, 1985, unpublished. So we know that there were people who became Muslim from the slave community, and the greatest slave community was the Khoi people and the San people and the Xhosa people. But many of them also became Muslim. And they, especially after the freedom of slaves, they found that it was better for them to, in actual fact, learn Islam and become Muslim, because the Muslims were more self-sufficient as a Burqab community that had skills, etc., and they create their own madrasas and schools. It was comfortable for some of the Khoi people and some of the African to become Muslim and to be amongst the Muslims. So it is these kind of historical documents written by non-Muslims and written by colonialists that's mixed up this whole idea of the fact that the Muslims of Burqab were descendants of slaves. They actually, many of them did it deliberately, and others just followed what everybody else says without really going into it. But Professor Adam's work basically debunks all of that kind of thought, but brings in the fact that, yes, there are people that were slaves that became Muslim. You'll find later on that the Muslims of the Cape, in actual fact, of Burqab, had specific terms for people that became Muslim that were, in actual fact, not of the original people of the craft community that started off in 1658. Government and government-aided schools were, by law, open to all inhabitants of the colony, but most colored parents could not afford these schools. Their children had to attend Muslim mission schools, madrasas, colonial schools that posed a means of social mobility for colonialists did not do the same for the poor. The Muslims, as a reactive response to colonialist influence and control, opted to recognize their own culture and religious practices as the means for upward social mobility. They invested their time and money in the acquisition of knowledge of the religion of Islam beyond the borders of the Cape Colony. They were perhaps also aware that the colonialists had a certain amount of respect and fear for those with knowledge of the religion of Islam. That's an extremely important point. The colonialists were actually fearful of the Muslims. And if you read the Quran, you'll find that the Quran, Allah tells you that Allah has placed fear in the kafirs, in the person of disbelief. Allah has put fear in his heart for the Muslim. Even though they are in the majority, Allah says Allah puts fear in the heart of the kafir towards the Muslim. And this was a powerful feature of the Cape Muslims, of the Burqa Muslims and the Cape Muslims. They were feared by the colonialists and by the non-Muslims. And if you listen to historical records of the Muslims of the past in Cape Town, if they wore a fez, the people would relate and the forefather would relate. If the Muslim walks on the pavement with a fez on his head, the non-Muslim and the colonialists would leave the pavement and walk in the road when the Muslims come onto the pavement. There's also reports that if they needed a witness, they will go outside and they'll call a Muslim with a fez, and they will in actually ask him to sign. So you can see the fez was the fez on the head of the Muslims was extremely a great identity for strength. And you'll see later on what E.G. du Plessis did with the fez in order to decrease the power of this fez of the Cape Muslims, because they knew that that fez was an extremely powerful representation of a Muslim and the trustworthiness and the strength of the Muslim Ummah. What is also very important in the history of the Muslims, many of them were very connected to the spiritual world, and they could in actual fact impact on the surroundings through the spiritual activity or spiritual connections. And that also made the non-Muslims very fearful and the colonials very fearful of the Muslims. And the main feature of that is the ratib. They could hit themselves with a sword and not get hurt at all and not cut themselves. And that was very fearful. So you don't mess around with Muslims like that. And if you know from the Quranic perspective that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you that Allah puts fear in the kafir's heart for the Muslim, even though the Muslims are less in number, that is a core feature that the colonialists in actual fact experience. Up till today, there's this natural kind of fear when they come in the presence of the Muslim, especially when there's a very good Muslim. They will in actual fact know their place, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates a fear in the heart of a non-Muslim when he speaks to a Muslim. So when Muslims are acting today in a manner which is not good, they will get reminded by the non-Muslim to be like good Muslims. This is a very fascinating thing in the Cape, where non-Muslims actually remind Muslims who don't behave themselves properly to be like the Muslims who are good. And there were many who actually then realized, oh my goodness, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually guiding them through a person who doesn't believe. And that's part of the unseen power of the Muslims of the Cape. So the Muslims, as a reactive response to the colonialist influence and control, opted to recognize their own culture, their own religious practices as a means for upward mobility. They invested their time and their money in the acquisition of knowledge of the religion of Islam beyond the borders of Cape Town. They were perhaps also aware that the colonialists had a certain amount of respect and fear for those with knowledge of the religion of Islam. The education the colonists offered to the colored people were an education, quote, that may fit them for the business workplace, Baltino says, unquote. That business relates to making sure that colored children receive an education which entrenches their labor status. And that is very important. Our education is used to manipulate the market, the labor market. The mission schools contain a great amount of information on biblical history and geography and knowledge of the text of the scriptures, singing and repeating hymns formed a chief part of the school day. I know that. I was at St. Paul's. We had to do that ourselves. So it wasn't about developing skills of science, etc., or development of skills of engineering and so on in the Christian schools. It was basically propagating Christianity and decreasing the quality of the opportunity of exposure so that we as a non-white community cannot enter those jobs that they keep specifically for whites. So the educational department and the educational fraternity is very much designed to ensure that the white fraternity gets the top and the rest of the people suffer through the higher level of opportunities that they give, which need money. You need money to buy textbooks and to do all this, and you need a house. So they made sure that those particular things were not in place, so that you cannot succeed the educational fraternity. And for the masses of the non-whites, they actually didn't allow them to go to university. So you see, the education has been a tool to manipulate and to control the masses, which still is today. So that business relates to making sure that colored or non-white children receive an education which entrenches the apartheid, or it entrenches the class. That was even before apartheid, the class structure. Now, secular essential subjects of reading, writing, and arithmetic were seriously neglected on purpose, right? Aided systems, G78 and 83, educational statistics of the Cape of Good Hope in 1883, page 9. This is actually documented. In mission schools, ideology took preference over skills development for poor colored or non-Muslim or non-white children or colored children. The poverty of the families and the knowledge that mission schools were not designed for the progress of poor children caused parents to remove their children from the mission schools, to run errands, to go into the shop and to assist them, and girls to help domestic work, and while both parents go out to work. Most poor children were half-timers. This is sad information that came through from Professor Ajam's thesis. Some coming to denominational mission schools only in the morning, others only in the afternoon. This is to survive. They had to get their children to do something to survive. This reduced the school attendance by 30%. Non-denominational state schools attendance was fairly regular. Cape Superintendent General Education Report 1883. Now, this is just a general colored community because Muslims were not allowed to go past grade 4, which is standard 2. If they wanted to go further, they must become Christian. I mean, this was part of the law of the Cape. But the Muslims had the madrasa and they had their own skills development program amongst themselves. And so that didn't really affect them. They wanted to break down the Muslims like that and make them Christians, but they couldn't because of the skills, abilities, and the fact that they had their own Quran and they could actually teach their own culture. So the other colored people, or the Christian non-whites, they suffered more because they didn't have anything. They depended on the Christian schools, missionary schools, who actually oppressed them in the quality of the work, in not providing them housing, not providing support, etc. The poverty of the people and the unacceptable features of mission schools curriculum cause habitual absenteeism. Most Muslim parents of the children at these mission schools thus used the mission schools for bare necessities, for reading, writing, and arithmetic, and took their children out of the school as soon as they could. Some refused to send their children to Christian missionary schools entirely. Some Muslims sadly became Christian to gain access to some of the private, better Christian schools. And that is a sad feature. According to Dr. Azam's thesis, 9 Muslim families became Christian in order to get a further education because they didn't allow Muslims to go further. Now, that was the main reason, but they didn't succeed. There's only 9 people who slipped. And Dr. Philip Fourie of the Dutch Reformed Church reported in the commission that 9 Malay children became Christian in Claremont with full consent of their parents. Watermeyer Commission Report 1863. The mission schools did not focus on secular and practical skill development. They focused on the ability to read and understand the Bible. Dr. Dr. Langham Dale's Inspection of Schools report in 1868. The minority of Muslims generated resistance to these schools. The state's involvement was minimal in the ensuring of adequate supply of schools. Non-white education was in the hands of the churches, and whites were educated at well-supported state schools. The formulation of the Cape Colony's educational policy required that the state show more interest in the education at the Cape. The state tolerated Christian bias schools because they wanted missionary societies to reclaim a portion of the population from the heathenism and from corrupt forms of religion, which is Islam, according to the report of Maurice Education Commission in 1873. They started the Christian schools and mission schools in response or in reaction to the amount of people that became Muslim because of the madrasas. So the madrasas were the first public schools in the Cape, probably in the whole world, that actually dealt with people and educated their children in the best possible manner. And this allowed people to become Muslim. And this was a freakish feature for the colonialists because they were not educating their people, and they were actually had a law against slaves becoming educated. And so therefore, Muslims in the burqa giving non-Muslims the opportunity to be with them, to look after their children, to show them the practicalities of Islam, invited them in an open heart, and so they became Muslim because they had a home, they could marry, which the Christian churches didn't allow them to do. But so the Muslims, even though they were a small amount of people, they were extremely powerful as a counterculture to the Christian colonialist style of dealing with people. Political interests started occupying the minds of the Cape legislators after 1863 Watermeyer report. The state saw the influence of the church to control the masses. The state saw it fit to fund schools that separate evangelism from conventional schooling. The Cape Education Act of 1865 stipulated there was a significant reduction in the authority previously allowed to be dominated by the clergy. No pupil was to be required to attend religious instruction without the consent of the parents or guardians. This is now looking at the color schools, the Christian schools, the mission schools, and how the government started manipulating those particular schools. Atkin, Teaching South African, A History of Educational Policy in South Africa, 1978, at the University of Rhodesia. St. Paul's motto. I went to St. Paul's. It's up the road by me. In quote, not being a church for colored children. That was St. Paul's particular approach, okay? Attracted many Muslim children to their classes because St. Paul's was very much influenced by the Muslim families. And so St. Paul started creating a more open class of opportunity for people, for Muslims, because it was in the burqa. With reading and writing ability so limited amongst the masses, the lack of state interest in the education of the subjugated, no records of parents refusing or giving consent to Christian religious instruction existed. The Christian mission attempt through schooling was ineffective. So they wanted to create a Christian missionary work in the mission schools. In the burqa, they had St. Paul's, and they had the St. Paul's Church and St. Paul's School, and they had there's always also the maternity hospital that was at the top, also aimed at Christianizing the Muslims. They were ineffective eventually. The staff members and the children and the nurses and the doctors all became Muslim. And St. Monica's Home, which was aimed at Christianizing the Muslim, became more of a Muslim institution with a halal halal kitchen. Most of the doctors became Muslim, and or were Muslim. So what they tended to want to do in burqa was flipped around. The Muslims, the Christians became Muslim, and the Muslim and the Christian institutions became Islamic institutions in the sense of that they started catering for Muslims. So it is a great pity that in the case of so many of the children are taken from mission schools, this is a quote now, to earn a livelihood at far too young an age, the consequences being that in a few months or years, the great majority have forgotten almost all they have learned, and the school life, which have done so much for them, had it been prolonged, has done very little beyond giving them elementary notions of reading, writing, and summing, and some training in habits of cleanliness and neatness and order. This is again Lightfoot's quote. The social conditions of the poor nullified the benefits of many educational endeavors. This is a quote. They propose that they're helping the people through education, but the poverty of the people breaks down all of that. Still is today. You put people in a poor environment and you underpay their parents, and you then want them to go to school, which is on a level of people who have money and a level of people who are enfranchised. They will never be able to succeed there because homework and textbooks and materials and being able to go to the library and having one parent and home, that is required to get the colonial school to work. If that is not available, but everybody must write the same examination, go through the same curriculum, then obviously you're going to marginalize the masses. But it's done deliberately to maintain the capitalistic marketplace. So the colored people, okay, which is now mostly the Christian people, uh, 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 left school to join laboring classes. And the laboring classes and the craft classes, obviously, that belonged to the Muslims. The Muslims were the masters of the craft. So, and continue to dwell in conditions of poverty and squalor. That is now the Christian colored people. The Anglican mission school, like St. Mark's, St. Philip's, and St. Mary's, became overcrowded. Government funding was limited for these mission schools. The overcrowded buildings became less attractive because improvements could not be made due to the lack of state funding. On purpose, they did this on purpose. The church had a harder task to try and include habits of cleanliness and neatness under these circumstances. The crime increased under the strain of a lack of state funding for mission and school improvements. And you can see how the Muslims were kept safe because they refused to go to those schools. They go out of the schools, you can read and write, and then you can come out. You can learn how to do dressmaking. My mother was an excellent dressmaker. She only went up to standard 3 or grade 3, right, which is standard 2 or something like that, but could write, etc. Intelligent woman, right? But the parents of those days, he says, no, you're going to become a Christian. You're going to become, they call it Christian school. You're going to become a non-Muslim if you go to their school. So you come out and you go to the slumster school. That's what the term Christian school, slumster school came about. It's the threat of Christianity in the face of Muslims who are the minority, but educational fraternities was controlled by the church and the state. But having the craft, the ability to teach the children, they call the ambach, that and the Quran and the Arabic, etc., and their own language, that was their protection by the Creator, that a small community could become a powerful community, self-sustainable, and they could withstand the onslaught of the Christianized colonialist education and the running of the country. So you can also then see that the crime rate of a country is directly related to depriving people of quality knowledge and quality conditions to live under. It is a business of the capitalists to ensure that there is crime, because everything else is then supporting that crime. That is it will be the colonialists that will have the jails. They will have the protective units. They will produce the guns. They will have the police force, etc. They will pay those people. So all of those people were white at those particular points in time. It supported that whole infrastructure. The Muslims on the out there and kept away from that particular institutions and taught their children at home. and assisted other people, and those people became Muslim, started intermarrying, etc. And also white people, colonialists that came and saw the beauty of the Muslim community in the Cape, became Muslim. They started marrying our women, and our women married their men who became Muslim, etc. And the whole thing developed as the beauty of the Muslims of the Cape, the way they lived as Muslims. Didn't have a lot of reading skills, English reading, which was their protection because they couldn't read all the nonsense that were given to them in terms of these mission pamphlet that used to come. And they used to come every Sunday. You're in a book up, they knock on your door, they're awake. They come give you these things to try and get you to become Christian. Our Muslims didn't read that kind of stuff, and they didn't read English. So they would actually invite them in and say, come, sit down, and they tell them about Islam. And what was the very strong feature of the Cape Muslims was the upatafels. They would invite people and they allow them to sit and have some cake and have some kusistas and have some this, etc. And because they were brilliant in terms of their food. Many became Muslim because of the food, because of the upatafels. Today, one day I saw in Leeuwen Street, there was a queue of people standing. The traffic department, there was from the traffic department, the police force, the normal people, Christians and Muslims standing in a queue on a Sunday morning wanting to buy cook sisters. So the cook sisters made a lot of impact on the communities here. Our food that we're making, the samosas and the dalchis, that was so exciting for the people that came into our community, and the cakes that they made, that they wanted to be with us, and many of them became Muslim because of the foods and the upatafels and the friendliness of our people. And if you talk about friendliness of our people, the Malaysians and the Indonesians are very friendly people. That's basically some of our ancestors were from that particular area. They love enjoying themselves. They love making fun, and very, very hospitable people, very friendly people. Whereas the colonists were all like stiff upper lip, trying to pretend all the time to be in power and had no particular excitement in their life. so, so there's a kind of a tongue-in-cheek of kind of power that the Muslims had of the Cape, is that Mhm. we know we have lots of things to offer which you need, and so it's going to be difficult for you to overpower us in many ways. And because Allah is with us, the Creator is with us, He's not with you until you become a Muslim. So that is part of the very important. If people want to know how was it possible for the Muslims, a small amount of 1.33, nearly 2% Muslims in Cape Town in South Africa, to have such a wide particular impact on the South African population, it is because, as I was sitting one day in Makkah, a Malaysian asked me, how many Muslims in South Africa? And I said 2%. And he said, 2%? My goodness, you look like 98% of the community in the media. And then he was quiet for a few seconds, and he said to me, you know what? Do you know why you look so much in the world's eyes? Is because the angels are with you. The malaika are with you, and they support you. That is why you are so strong. So if anybody wants to know how is it possible for the Muslims of the Cape to be so powerful in terms of the impact in the world, on the world stage, it's the amount of religiousness. Of a few of them are very, very, very religious, very pious people, and this few gets the assistance of the angels, and others that are not so pious get the benefit of it. Even the non-Muslims get the benefit of it. And so we must realize that many of the awliya, the friends of God, the saints that are lying all over in Cape Town, in Bukap, etc., and on the mountains and the signals, we are descendants of these people, and they still have an impact on even the natural features of life. As I pointed out, even the fires that don't even touch the graves. That is how powerful the Creator has made these people, that even in their time of death, they still are powerful because the Creator has blessed them. And so we are descendants of these people. And so we are powerful in terms of the Spirit of God that is with us and the spirit of the angels that are assisting us. And so people must come and they come to the Muslims areas, not because so much of the of the buildings, etc. But it is the atmosphere of spirituality that attracts them, because they know in their own soul that they want to be Muslim, but their minds are messing around with them. But they want to be amongst Muslims, and eventually they do become Muslim. And inshallah, we do have that particular job to do as people of Allah, people that are Muslim. It is for us to invite people in every beautiful way to become Muslim, so that for every one person that become Muslim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him we get the reward of the whole world. So it is important for Muslims to share their knowledge and to bring people into and to open up the doors of Islam to everybody. It's not a matter of being arrogant or being self-righteous or being prejudiced about against other people. No, it's a fact of knowing the truth, and sharing the truth. And people who are truthful will recognize the truth and they will become Muslim, and even teach us later on how to be. Some of them become better Muslims than us, because the Quran says that. For Muslims, Allah says, some of you will leave your faith, but I will replace you with better people, Allah says, who will love me and I will love them in return. And you see that today. Some of the Muslims are doing the right thing, then other people become Muslim. They're actually much better people. And they set a good example internationally, alhamdulillah. Not just in the Cape, but all over the world. May Allah guide us that we keep on the straight path, inshallah, that we will not lose our path, and may Allah protect and guide our people and our children, inshallah, and that they will see the value and not become darkened by the colonialist and Western kind of ideologies that are trying to confuse people in this day and age. So inshallah, may Allah protect us, inshallah. May Allah accept us from me and Professor Ajam for the work that they've done to bring to us the real history of the Cape Muslims, inshallah. This is end of part 2. I'm on page 28. And the next topic will be Cape Non-Whites Challenge. Non-Whites Challenge, okay? Assalamu alaikum. Shukran. Assalamu alaikum.